How I took down my boss who tried to ruin my life. My ex-boss tried to sabotage my career, humiliate me in front of our entire company, and nearly cost me my relationship and financial stability. I methodically collected evidence, exposed his corruption, and in the end, watched his career and reputation crumble. What goes around comes around, and I made sure he got what he deserved. Buckle up, this one's long. Let me start by saying I'm not someone who normally seeks revenge. I believe in moving on and letting life sort things out. But when someone deliberately tries to destroy your livelihood, your reputation, and even your personal life, you have no choice but to fight back. And that's exactly what I did. This is the story of how I methodically took down my boss, let's call him Dan, after he tried to ruin my life. This setup. About 2 years ago, I landed what I thought was my dream job at a tech company. I'd been in the field for about a decade, working my way up, so when I was hired as a project manager at a fast-growing company, I was ecstatic. The pay was great, the team seemed welcoming, and there were so many opportunities for growth. Then there was Dan, my direct supervisor. Right from the start, I had a feeling something was off with him. On the surface, he appeared professional, but there was an underlying smugness to him. He loved micromanaging, and heaven forbid you challenge him or come up with a better idea. But I stayed focused on my work and kept a low profile, figuring it wasn't worth the trouble. Dan, however, had other plans for me. Things go south. 6 months in, I was thriving. I'd brought in several major clients, finished 2 projects ahead of schedule, and the VP had even mentioned me as one of the company's rising stars in a team meeting. And Dan? He couldn't stand it. Every time I got praise, you could see the jealousy simmering behind his forced smile. Soon, he started undermining me. It began with nitpicking. He would criticize the most insignificant details in my reports, rewrite my emails, and publicly question my decisions in front of the team. He even started taking credit for some of my work. It was annoying, but I dealt with it, thinking that my results would speak for themselves. But then he crossed a line. The betrayal. One day, Dan called me into his office for what he called a performance review. He started with vague criticisms, saying I wasn't being a team player and that my communication skills were lacking. I knew where this was heading, but I stayed calm. Then he dropped a bombshell. He was recommending I be demoted, effective immediately. This demotion wasn't just a title change. It came with a 30% pay cut and meant I'd lose all the major clients I brought in. I'd be stuck doing menial tasks while he took over the relationships I had worked so hard to build. To make things worse, he warned me that if I refused the demotion, he'd begin documenting every tiny mistake I made to build a case for firing me. This wasn't just about control. He wanted me out. The plan. Here's where Dan seriously underestimated me. You see, I'd been documenting everything since the first signs of trouble. Every email, every revision he made to my work, every inappropriate comment he slipped in during meetings. I had a file packed with evidence that showed how he'd been undermining me from day one. If he wanted a battle, I was more than prepared. Step 1. I needed to secure my future. I quietly began reaching out to contacts in the industry, scheduling interviews during lunch breaks. Within a month, I had a job offer from a competitor, complete with a pay raise and a more senior title. Step 1. Complete. Step 2. I needed Dan to make himself look bad. I started intentionally underperforming on tasks that didn't matter much while excelling in the critical areas. This put Dan in a tough spot. He constantly criticized me for the small things, but my major work was praised by the higher-ups. He started to look erratic, and people began to question his judgment. Step 3. I subtly turned the team against him. I began casually bringing up some of Dan's more unreasonable demands in conversation with coworkers. It didn't take long before others shared their own frustrations. Dan was slowly losing the respect of the entire team. Step 4. The final move. The execution. Remember that folder of evidence? It wasn't just emails and reports. I had also recorded some of our private conversations. In these, Dan admitted to sabotaging other employees and bending company policies to get ahead. He even implied he had dirt on our VP, which is why he thought he was untouchable. I waited patiently for the perfect opportunity, and then it came. One day, Dan mistakenly CC'd me on an email where he called me difficult to manage and suggested I was lucky to still have a job. That email was the final piece of the puzzle. I forwarded it, along with my collection of evidence, to HR, the VP, and the company's legal team. Then I handed in my resignation, effective immediately, citing a hostile work environment. I knew the email alone would be enough to launch an investigation. But with the rest of the evidence I had, Dan's days were numbered. The fallout. Within days of my resignation, things began to unravel. HR launched a full investigation into Dan's behavior, interviewing the entire team. The recordings I'd provided were particularly damaging, especially the ones where he admitted to breaking company policies. His supposed derp on the VP? A bluff. He had nothing. 3 weeks later, Dan was fired. Not only that, but word spread quickly in our industry about his unethical practices. He couldn't get a job anywhere. Last I heard, he tried applying to a small startup, but even they turned him down after hearing about his reputation. As for me, I'm thriving in my new job. My career is back on track, and I'm working with people who appreciate my skills. Watching Dan's downfall was surprisingly satisfying, not just because I got revenge, but because I stood up for myself when he tried to tear me down. So, that's the story of how I took down the boss who thought he could get away with sabotaging my career. And honestly, I don't regret a single move. Edit. Wow, I didn't expect this to get so much attention. Thank you for all for watching.